Long ago in medieval times, life in Europe was very different from the world we know today. If you were born in those days, most likely you would not have lived in a grand city or castle. Instead, your home would have been a small village. These villages were the heart of medieval society, and they were carefully organized in their own way. Today, I will take you on a journey to step into one of those villages, to see how it looked, how it worked, and how people lived side by side. When you first walked into a medieval village, the first thing you would notice was its size. Villages were not very big. Some had just 20 or 30 families, others maybe 100. They were small clusters of homes surrounded by fields and meadows. Life was simple, hard, and closely tied to the land. Every single person had a role, and the layout of the village reflected that. At the very center of the village stood the church. The church was not just a place of prayer. It was the heart of the community. People gathered there every Sunday, but it was also where announcements were made, where festivals began, and where disputes were settled. The sound of the church bell called people not only to worship, but also to meetings and important moments in village life. The priest in the church held great influence. He guided people on spiritual matters, but also acted like a teacher, an advisor, and sometimes even a judge. Close to the church, you would find the manor house. This belonged to the lord of the village. He might not always live there, as some lords preferred their larger castles elsewhere, but the manor was the center of his authority. The lord owned the land, and the villagers worked that land. In return, the villagers were given protection and the right to live there. This was the system of feudalism, and it shaped every aspect of the medieval village. Around the church and manor house, you would see the peasants' homes. These were simple cottages, built from wood, mud, and thatch. They were small, usually just 1 or 2 rooms, and families often shared the space with their animals during winter for warmth. Life inside was dark, smoky, and crowded, but it was home. The cottages were grouped together closely, forming a little cluster of life at the heart of the village. From this cluster spread the open fields. Medieval villages followed a system known as the open field system. Instead of each farmer owning one single block of land, the fields around the village were divided into strips. Each family was given a number of strips scattered across the fields. This meant that no single family had the best or worst land all to themselves. It was shared in a way that balanced fairness. The strips were long and narrow, marked by little ridges or posts. Villagers worked their strips side by side, and in many ways, farming was a collective effort. They plowed together, planted together, and harvested together. The crops were usually wheat, barley, oats, and rye. These grains fed the people, while some of the land was left for grazing animals. Cows, sheep, goats, and pigs were vital for milk, wool, meat, and leather. Every family kept some animals, and they often grazed on the common pasture, another shared space in the village. There was also woodland nearby, where villagers collected firewood, nuts, and berries, and where pigs could forage for food. Life in the village was not only about farming, though farming was the main task. There were also special roles. The blacksmith worked with iron, making tools, nails, and horseshoes. The miller ran the watermill, or windmill, grinding grain into flour. The carpenter made wooden items, from carts to furniture. Each of these people had an important place in the village structure. The work of one supported the work of another, and together the whole community survived. The daily rhythm of the village followed the seasons. Spring was for plowing and planting. Summer was busy with weeding and tending crops. Autumn was the most important season, the time of harvest. Everyone joined in, even children and the elderly. Winter was quieter, though it was also the hardest time, when food was scarce and survival was tough. People relied on what they had stored, and often meals became simple and plain. Rules and duties kept the village running. The peasants, also called serfs in many places, owed service to the lord. They had to work a certain number of days on the lord's land, called the domain. They also paid rents in crops, animals, or labor. In return, the lord offered protection. If enemies attacked, the villagers could take shelter in the manor or nearby castle. It was not a free life, but it was a stable one in its own way. Festivals and holy days added color to village life. There were days of feasting after harvest, celebrations at Christmas and Easter, and local fairs. These were times when music, dancing, and storytelling filled the air. It was also a chance for villagers to forget the hardships of daily life and come together as a joyful community. The organization of the medieval village was not random. Every part had its purpose. The central cluster of church, manor, and cottages formed the social core. The open fields showed the shared farming system. The common land and woodlands showed the shared resources. And the duties between lord and peasant showed the balance of obligation and protection that defined medieval society. If we imagine walking through such a village on a normal day, we would hear the sound of chickens clucking, cows lowing, and blacksmiths hammering. We would smell bread baking in clay ovens, smoke rising from hearth fires, and manure from the animals. We would see children playing in the dirt, women spinning wool or carrying water, and men bent over their strips of land. The whole scene would be simple yet full of life. It is important to remember that not every village was the same. Geography shaped them. A village near a river might have fishermen and watermills. A village near forests might depend more on woodcutting and hunting. In mountain areas, herding sheep and goats mattered more than farming grain. But the basic organization remained similar across much of medieval Europe. The church, the manor, the cottages, the fields, and the shared duties were always at the center. Over time, some villages grew into towns. Trade increased, markets appeared, and walls were built. But many villages stayed small for centuries, following the same patterns of organization. These patterns created a strong sense of community. People knew each other closely. They depended on one another for survival. Life was tough, but it was also deeply connected to the land and to the rhythm of nature. When we look back at medieval villages today, we see more than just clusters of houses. We see a whole way of life, carefully balanced between people, land, and duty. We see how human beings organize themselves in small groups to survive and thrive in a world without modern machines or conveniences. And we see how these villages laid the foundation for the towns, cities, and communities that came later. So, the organization of a medieval village was simple but powerful. At the center was the church and manor. Around them, the cottages of peasants. Beyond them, the strips of open fields, and further still, the commons and woodlands. Within this structure, every person had a role. Every piece of land had a purpose, and every season had its work. Together, it created a system that lasted for hundreds of years, shaping the lives of millions of people. And that is the story of how medieval villages were organized. It was not glamorous, but it was steady, ordered, and full of meaning for those who lived there. By stepping into their world, even in imagination, we gain a window into the roots of our own communities today.